You keep waiting for someone to choose you, to validate you, to finally see your worth. But what if the very act of waiting is the prison that keeps you from ever being truly free? And what if Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared, "The death of God and the birth of the authentic self," understood something about human suffering that could shatter every chain you have wrapped around your own heart? In his hidden teachings about the will to power and the transvaluation of all values, Nietzsche revealed why the pain you feel when others reject you is not evidence of your inadequacy, but proof of your power. Why the emptiness that consumes you when you depend on external validation is not a sign of weakness, but the birth cry of your authentic self demanding to be born. This is not about positive thinking or self-help platitudes. This is about the most dangerous and liberating truth ever spoken, that your suffering contains the seeds of your greatest transformation, that your deepest pain is pointing you toward your highest potential, and that everything you think is wrong with you might actually be everything that is right with you, fighting to break free from a world that profits from your self-doubt. What if the heaviness you carry is not sickness, but sight? What if the weight pressing down on your chest is not depression, but the unbearable lightness of finally seeing through the illusions that keep other men smiling in their sleep? Nietzsche understood that the man who begins to question everything, who starts to see the puppet strings behind social conventions, will inevitably feel the crushing loneliness of awakening consciousness. This is not pathology, this is philosophy made flesh. The world will rush to medicate your clarity, to numb your newfound vision with labels and pills and the false comfort of joining the walking dead. They call it depression because they cannot. Better call it what it truly is, the first painful breath of a man being born into authentic existence. Every prophet, every revolutionary, every man who dared to think beyond the boundaries of his time, walked through this valley of shadows, where old certainties die and new truths have not yet taken root. Your sadness is not a malfunction. It is the natural response of a conscious soul trapped in an unconscious world. The depression you feel is your spirit's refusal to participate in the grand charade, your psyche's rebellion against a life that demands you betray your deepest knowing for social acceptance. This darkness is not the absence of light. It is the presence of too much truth for your current container to hold. You are not broken, you are breaking open. You are not sick, you are seeing. You are not depressed. You are being called to something greater than the comfortable numbness that passes for happiness in a world that has forgotten how to truly live. The moment you stop finding meaning in what everyone else celebrates, the moment their laughter sounds hollow and their achievements feel empty, you have crossed a threshold from which there is no return. Nietzsche called this the beginning of the transvaluation of all values, when your inner compass stops pointing toward the magnetic north of social approval and begins its painful recalibration toward authentic truth. This is when the real loneliness begins, not the loneliness of being alone, but the far more profound isolation of being awake among the sleeping. Your friends notice the change first, how you no longer laugh at their jokes, how you seem distant during conversations that once animated you. They sense something dangerous in your silence, something that threatens the comfortable agreements that hold their world together. The herd instinct kicks in, and suddenly you become the problem to be solved, the mood to be lifted, the perspective to be corrected. They cannot understand that your withdrawal is not from life but toward it, not away from meaning, but toward a meaning so much deeper that their shallow pools of purpose cannot contain it. This rejection you feel, this sense of not belonging anywhere, is not evidence of your inadequacy, but proof of your evolution. Every man who has ever contributed something meaningful to this world has first had to endure the exile from everything meaningless. The caterpillar does not become a butterfly by fitting in better with other caterpillars. It becomes a butterfly by disappearing into the darkness of its own transformation, alone and unseen. Your soul is not rejecting connection. It is rejecting false connection. It is not turning away from love. It is turning away from the counterfeit emotions that masquerade as love in a world that has forgotten what the real thing feels like. This is not antisocial behavior. This is the deeply social act of refusing to poison the well of authentic human connection with your own inauthenticity. When you gaze long into the abyss of your own darkness, something profound happens that modern psychology refuses to acknowledge. That darkness begins to gaze back into you, not as enemy, but as teacher, not as pathology, but as the raw material of your own becoming. Nietzsche knew that every man who seeks to transcend his limitations must first descend into the underworld of his own psyche, must face the monsters he has spent his life avoiding, must befriend the very shadows he once feared would destroy him. This confrontation with your inner abyss is not the beginning of madness. It is the beginning of mastery. Every dark thought you have pushed away, every uncomfortable truth you have refused to face, every aspect of yourself you have deemed unacceptable, waits in that darkness with a gift only it can give. The anger you have suppressed contains the fire you need to forge a new life. The sadness you have medicated holds the depth you need to love authentically. The fear you have numbed carries the wisdom you need to navigate real danger. The abyss stares back because it recognizes itself in you, because it knows you are finally ready to integrate what you have spent your life disintegrating. This is not depression. This is the dark night of the soul that every mystic, every philosopher, every man who has ever achieved something meaningful has had to endure. The darkness is not trying to consume you. It is trying to complete you, to give you back the parts of yourself you traded away for social acceptance. Most men spend their entire lives running from this encounter, medicating it, distracting themselves from it, surrounding themselves with enough noise and busyness to drown out the call from their own depths. But you are here, in this darkness, because something in you knows that the only way out is through, that the only way to wholeness is to gather up all the scattered pieces of yourself, even the ones that scare you. Comfort is the silent killer of every great man who ever lived, the invisible prison that feels like paradise until you realize the bars are made of your own compromises. Nietzsche understood that transformation requires friction, that growth demands discomfort, that every breakthrough is preceded by a breakdown of the structures that kept us safe but small. The man who has arranged his life to avoid all pain has also arranged his life to avoid all possibility, all growth, all authentic power. Your current suffering is not evidence that something is wrong with your life. It is evidence that something is finally right with your consciousness. For too long you accepted a life that was too small for your soul, too predictable for your spirit, too comfortable for your potential. That restlessness you feel, that dissatisfaction that gnaws at you even when everything looks perfect from the outside, is not ingratitude. It is your authentic self refusing to be buried alive under the weight of false contentment. The comfortable man never asks the hard questions because he fears the hard answers, never challenges his assumptions because he fears what he might discover, never risks his security because he has mistaken survival for living. But you are no longer that man. You can no longer pretend that comfort equals happiness, that safety equals fulfillment, that avoiding pain is the same as embracing joy. Something in you has awakened to the terrible truth that a life without risk is a life without meaning. This discomfort you feel is not depression. It is your soul demanding an upgrade, your spirit insisting on expansion, your authentic self refusing. to be contained any longer by the small story you have been telling about who you are and what you're capable of. The caterpillar must destroy its comfortable existence to become the butterfly, and you must be willing to let everything familiar die for everything magnificent to be born. Every man worships something, and the moment you stop finding salvation in the altars where other men bow, you discover that your gods were never gods at all, but golden calves dressed up as divinity. Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God not as atheism, but as the recognition that the external authorities we have surrendered our power to are themselves powerless, that the validation we seek from others is worthless, because it comes from people who are themselves seeking validation. This is when the real spiritual crisis begins, when you realize that everything you thought would save you needs saving itself. The career that was supposed to give you meaning feels hollow. The relationship that was supposed to complete you feels empty. The achievements that were supposed to validate your worth feel meaningless. This is not failure. This is the natural consequence of placing your faith in finite things and expecting infinite returns. Your depression is not evidence of spiritual poverty, but spiritual wealth. The soul's refusal to be satisfied with fool's gold when it knows real treasure exists. The false gods must die before the true God can be born, and the true God is not outside you but within you. Not in the approval of others, but in the approval of your own authentic self. This death feels like the end of the world, because it is the end of the world, the end of the small world you constructed out of other people's opinions and social expectations. But every ending is also a beginning. Every death is also a birth. Every collapse is also a clearing. Your despair is not evidence that you have lost faith. It is evidence that you have found faith. Faith in something so much greater than the petty securities and shallow satisfactions that used to sustain you. The old gods are dying because they are too small to contain the magnitude of who you are becoming, too weak to support the weight of your authentic power, too false to deserve the worship of your awakening consciousness. The moment you stop dividing your inner world into acceptable and unacceptable parts, the moment you cease the exhausting war between who you think you should be and who you actually are, you enter the dangerous territory that Nietzsche called beyond good and evil. This is not moral relativism, this is moral maturity, the recognition that your wholeness includes everything you have spent your life trying to eliminate, that your power includes everything you have been taught to suppress. Your anger is not evil. It is energy that has been misdirected. Your selfishness is not sin. It is self-preservation that has been misunderstood. Your darkness is not darkness at all, but light that has been forced underground by a world that cannot handle the full spectrum of human experience. The depression you feel is your psyche's rebellion against this artificial division, your soul's refusal to keep playing the game of moral perfectionism that has kept you weak and fragmented. Most men spend their lives trying to be good, according to standards they never chose, trying to eliminate parts of themselves that are not problems to be solved, but resources to be integrated. They wonder why they feel powerless, why they feel inauthentic, why they feel like they are living someone else's life, never realizing that they have given away their power to moral systems designed to keep them controllable and predictable. 2. Path beyond good and evil is not the path of amorality. It is the path of authentic morality, where your actions flow not from external rules but from internal wisdom. Not from fear of punishment, but from love of excellence. Not from the need to be seen as good, but from the power to be genuinely effective. This is where real strength begins, where real authenticity emerges, where real transformation becomes possible. What Nietzsche called the will to power was never about dominating others. It was about the far more difficult and meaningful task of dominating yourself, of becoming master of your own thoughts, emotions, and reactions, instead of their slave. The depression you experience is often nothing more than the rebellion of a powerful mind that has been taught to surrender its authority to external circumstances, to hand over its creative power to the opinions and moods of others who themselves have no mastery over their own inner world. Every time you allow your emotional state to be determined by someone else's behavior, every time you give your mental peace away to situations beyond your control, every time you wait for external conditions to improve before you give yourself permission to feel powerful, you are practicing the will to weakness instead of the will to power. Your mind is the only territory you truly govern, the only kingdom where your sovereignty is absolute, yet most men live as exiles from their own consciousness. The will to power over your own mind means recognizing that your thoughts are not facts, that your emotions are not commands, that your reactions are choices, even when they feel automatic. It means understanding that the same mental energy you use to torture yourself with negative thinking can be redirected toward creating the internal conditions that support your growth and transformation. This is not positive thinking. This is powerful thinking, thinking that serves your authentic development rather than your neurotic patterns. Your depression begins to dissolve not when your external circumstances improve, but when you reclaim your internal authority, when you stop being a victim of your own mental habits and start being the architect of your own consciousness. The will to power is the will to take responsibility for your inner world, to stop waiting for rescue from outside and start creating the conditions for your own liberation from within. There is a moment in every man's awakening when he must perform the most sacred and terrifying ritual of all. He must dance on the grave of who he used to be, celebrate the death of the false self that kept him safe but small, mourn and rejoice simultaneously for the man who had to die so the real man could be born. Nietzsche understood that transformation is not addition, but subtraction, not becoming more of who you are, but becoming less of who you are not, stripping away every borrowed identity until only the authentic core remains. The depression you feel is often the funeral music for parts of yourself that served their purpose, but have now become obstacles to your growth. The people-pleaser must die for the authentic man to emerge. The perfectionist must be buried for the creative force to flow. The victim must be laid to rest for the hero to rise. This death feels real because it is real. These aspects of yourself are not just changing, they are ending. And every ending deserves to be grieved, even when it is necessary. But grief and celebration can coexist in the heart of a man who understands that every death feeds new life, that every ending creates space for a new beginning, that every loss of what is false creates the possibility of gaining what is true. You are not losing yourself. You are finding yourself, not becoming less but becoming more, not dying but being reborn into a version of yourself that you could never have imagined when you were trapped in the small story of who you thought you had to be. This dance on the grave of your former self is not macabre. It is magnificent, not morbid but liberating, not an ending but the most powerful beginning you have ever experienced. The man you used to be was never really you anyway. He was just a collection of adaptations and compromises and survival strategies that kept you alive, but never let you truly live. Nietzsche's most profound teaching was the eternal return, the idea that you should live each moment as if you would have to live it exactly the same way for all eternity. That every choice should be made with the understanding that this choice defines not just your present, but your eternal essence. The depression you feel is often your authentic self's horror at the thought of repeating the inauthentic life you have been living, your soul's rebellion against the idea of spending eternity trapped in patterns that diminish rather than elevate. Your true nature If you had to live your current life over and over again, exactly as it is, for all eternity, would you choose it? Would you embrace it? Would you say yes to every moment, including the painful ones? Or would you recoil in horror at the prospect of endless repetition of your current choices and compromises? This is not just a philosophical thought experiment. This is the most practical question you will ever ask yourself, because the answer reveals whether you are living your authentic life or someone else's. The eternal return is not about literal repetition. It is about the quality of presence you bring to your existence, the degree of authenticity you embody in each moment, the extent to which your choices flow from your deepest truth rather than your surface fears. When you align your life with your authentic self, when you make choices that honor your deepest values and highest potential, the thought of eternal return becomes not a nightmare, but a dream come true. Your depression lifts not when your circumstances change, but when you start making choices worthy of eternal repetition. When you begin living in a way that your authentic self would choose again and again, without regret or reservation. This is when you stop being a victim of time and start being its master. When you stop enduring your life and start creating it. When you stop surviving and start truly living. The final revelation of your awakening is the recognition that you were never broken, never lacking, never insufficient. You were simply buried under layers of conditioning and compromise and false beliefs about who you had to be to survive in a world that fears authentic power. Nietzsche called this process of uncovering your true nature, becoming who you are, not becoming someone new, but excavating someone ancient, someone who has been waiting patiently beneath all the roles and masks and adaptations for the moment, when you would be brave enough to let him breathe again. Your depression was never evidence of your weakness. It was evidence of your strength, the strength of an authentic self that refused to be silenced, that kept sending you signals through your pain, that something was wrong with the life you were living, not something wrong with you. Every moment of despair was your true self knocking on the door of your consciousness. Every wave of sadness was your soul's attempt to wash away what was false, so what was true could emerge. The man you are becoming is not a stranger. He is the most familiar presence you have ever known. He is who you were before the world taught you to be afraid of your own power, before you learned to hide your light, to make others comfortable, before you traded your authentic voice for social acceptance. He has been with you all along, waiting in the shadows of your consciousness, growing stronger with every act of courage, every moment of honesty, every choice that honors truth over comfort. This is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of your real life, not the completion of your transformation, but the commencement of your authentic existence. You are not becoming someone else. You are becoming who you were always meant to be, who you have always been beneath the surface, who you will always be when all the false layers are finally stripped away and only the eternal truth of your being remains. The question that will either terrify you or liberate you is this: what if the very darkness you have been trying to escape is actually the doorway to the light you have been seeking your entire life? Take a moment right now to sit with that possibility, to feel what it would mean if your depression was not your enemy, but your greatest teacher. If your suffering was not punishment, but preparation for something magnificent. Tell me in the comments below, what false god are you finally ready to let die? What comfortable prison are you finally ready to break free from? What version of yourself are you finally ready to bury so your authentic self can be born? If this message reached something deep inside you, if you felt the stirring of recognition in your chest, if you are ready to stop running from your own transformation, then subscribe to this channel, because we are just getting started on this journey from the false self to the authentic self, from the comfortable lie to the liberating truth, from who you think you have to be to who you were always meant to become.